Mr. Himmeline. Mr. Hemmer. Mr. Muldowney. Mr. Nazaro. Mr. Nebel. Mr. O'Connell. Mr. Odell. Mr. Pavlak. Mrs. Rankin. Mr. Scudder. Mrs. Starks. Ms. Vanstrom. Mr. Whitford. Mr. Wilfong. Chairman Wendell.
Here.
18 members present. There is quorum.
Thank you.
Anyone want to speak to the first bill on the floor?
As I said last month, we are very pleased that the Alliance has organized funding for a cleanup of Burtis Bay and Harbor Hotel shoreline and appreciate the quick response of the Sheldon Foundation, the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation, and Chautauqua County. We hope the same attention and urgency will be applied from now on to prevent the proliferation of the weeds and fragments which are the source of these problems. The Chautauqua Lake Partnership supports the cleanup and the generosity of the funding organizations. As you will recall, we proposed that since the cleanup will now be delayed 4 to 5 months, that the Alliance take advantage of the delay to prepare a request for proposals and a list of qualified contractors and solicit competitive cleanup plans, costs, and schedules. This will allow the creativity of the contractor community to be applied to an operation which is certain to be repeated in Chautauqua Lake in the future, and competition will ensure county taxpayers and foundation contributors get the best price and schedule. We continue to hope the Alliance and the Chautauqua County Legislature will seriously consider the partnership's recommendation. Thank you.
My name is Tom Erlinson. I live in the hamlet of Frewsburg, 26 Valley View Drive, in the town of Carroll. I'm speaking with reference to Resolution 30118 on this evening's agenda, which is to authorize use of the 2% occupancy tax monies to retain professional services to assist with developing a Chautauqua County or Chautauqua Lake weed management consensus strategy. The resolution authorizes the use of the 2% occupancy tax reserve to retain ecology and environment, engineering and geology, to review existing information and prepare an outline of potential strategies for building a weed management consensus strategy at a cost not to exceed $9,970. As I hope will become clear, I am not opposed to developing such a strategy. I trust that we all know that a Chautauqua Lake weed management strategy is sorely needed and long overdue. Rather, I am opposed to retaining an outside consultant for yet another report relating to Chautauqua Lake. While there are examples of the county's use of outside consultants, often at considerable expense, for issues relating to topics other than Chautauqua Lake, for example, the sale of the former county home that occurred in 2014, the lake with its eutrophic condition has been the reason for the expenditure of significant taxpayer money for contracted reports in recent years. Two major examples are the preparation and publication of the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Plan in 2010 and the Chautauqua Lake Macrophyte Management Strategy in 2017. Because of the complexity of the data gathering and preparation of those reports, I believe the use of the consulting firms involved was warranted. There are times when outside expertise is required. However, in my opinion, that is not the case for a third, more recent example, namely the hiring of a consulting firm, Ecologic LLC, by the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance to develop a tool used this year for evaluating proposals for lake and watershed projects submitted by local organizations. That tool development could have and should have been done locally. The cost of such reports to taxpayers is not my main point, however. Rather, I ask why it is that our decision makers, including members of this deliberative body, so often think it is necessary to hire outside consultants when we have many dedicated, intelligent, and experienced area residents who are quite capable of doing what is needed at less cost to county taxpayers. It is apparent to many county residents that it is hard decisions made by leaders both elected and appointed that are needed, not more studies done by others living elsewhere. Again, this resolution authorizes the use of 2% occupancy tax reserve to retain ecology and environmental engineering and geology. I do have several questions. Don't we know enough already about lake weed management to do that for ourselves? Is there not enough expertise within the 3 existing and active lake and watershed organizations to get that job done? And what about the Alliance and the County Department of Planning and Economic Development? Cannot employees of those components of county government, along with the county watershed coordinator, present the options and facilitate the achievement of consensus? Can we not develop a method of evaluating lake improvement proposals without costly outside help? With all of this past history, knowledge, and local expertise, why do we need to spend another $10,000 of taxpayer money to go outside for what I believe we can very well do for ourselves? And one more thing. The Chautauqua Lake Partnership has identified and emphasized a 35-year cycle of repetitive lawsuits, studies, and more lawsuits, naming it the Chautauqua Lake 3-step. Note that within the 3-step cycle, between the 2 lawsuits, are studies, always more studies, and done by others. Clearly, there has been an endless cycle of hiring outside experts to do what we often have abundant expertise to do for ourselves. Isn't that simply passing the buck? Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jim Werfritz. I'm going to speak to the same 2 resolutions, but in a little different way. I'm here tonight as Vice President of the Chautauqua Lake Partnership, and although I've owned property on the lake for only 14 years and established our final home here only 3 years ago, I've had the privilege of meeting many of you and getting to know and work with most of the town supervisors and village mayors and their boards in municipalities around the lake. You've heard specific comments on these 2 proposals requiring county revenue tonight from Paul Johnson and from Tom Erlinson. I'll provide a more general perspective on the resolutions, neither of which we believe should be funded at this time. First, the legislature has given me the opportunity to serve as a member of the South and Center Chautauqua Lake Sewer District Board of Directors at a very exciting time as we prepare to extend our system up through Stowe. My background as a civil engineer with a water resources concentration and decades of project management experience have come in handy as we contract for the engineering and construction of treatment plant upgrades and collection system expansion. In that role, I have become familiar with the county's well-thought-out contracting procedures, similar to those used throughout my career. The legislature now has an opportunity to require procedures similar to those for the Burtis Bay work. I'm sure you've seen photos of the out-of-control weed growth and fragment accumulation and the resulting fish kill in Burtis Bay this past October. The partnership worked with Burtis Bay's residents, including Mike and Peggy Newell, who addressed you in November, to bring the very disturbing situation to the attention of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And we wholeheartedly support an early spring cleanup of their lake bottom to surface weeds. However, we respectfully request that this body withhold funding for the Resolution 26318 for work which is at least 4 months away until other contractors besides the Chautauqua Lake Association have an opportunity to offer their cleanup solutions and price proposals in a competitive environment. Involvement of more than the CLA will ensure all cleanup options are considered and a competitive price is obtained. Second, as Partnership Vice President, I've had the opportunity to research the last 50-plus years of Chautauqua Lake weed management, read numerous studies, talk to many of those who were intimately involved, be involved in the truncated development of the county's macrophyte management strategy, and experience firsthand the challenges associated with improving and caring for our lake. It's clear to us that the solution for Chautauqua Lake weed management is not another study, a study that would reward a few Maple Springs and institution residents and the Chautauqua institution for filing unsupported lawsuits, and a study that would continue the lawsuit cycle that has prevented progress in our lake the last 35 years and made it noteworthy, not in a positive way, throughout New York State. We could not understand why our representative would propose such a study, arguably to stem the tide of lawsuits and studies by perpetuating that same cycle. The partnership proposed an optimal combination of weed harvesting and DEC permitted herbicides beginning in fall 2017, and had our lake management consultant active all across New York State and the Northeast U.S. using herbicides and weed harvesting, provide several case studies in our 2018 Labor Day weekend rally. That combination is the only way to manage weeds in a lake like ours. The Sheldon Foundation dedicated $20,000 to the Alliance, specifically to encourage a CLA-CLP, the partnership collaboration that we proposed for a joint 2019 CLA-CLP weed management program. Unfortunately, even with encouragement by Assemblyman Goodell, the CLA has refused to engage in such an effort, and as a result, we understand the Alliance may now repurpose that $20,000 for another use. We respectfully request that you do not approve funding of Resolution 301-18. If you do, you'll be perpetuating, not ending, the 35-year lawsuit cycle, which has prevented improvement and hastened the decline of the lake. Further, you would reward those who, through the last 35 years, have initiated or threatened lawsuits as a solution of the lake's problem, and in so doing, prevented meaningful improvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone speak to the first page of the floor? My name is Doug Champ. I'm a resident of District 12. My legislator is there, Elizabeth Rankin, and I appreciate her efforts. I also spent a considerable amount of time, actually, some 70 years as a citizen, other than military time, college time, on the lake, around the lake, and in the lake. I'm here as a citizen. I don't belong to any specific group. I represent, I think, people who understand that this lake is under threat from many centuries of human involvement. The issue at hand here is to try to seek out what we can do now. Being trained as a biologist, I also have some input in terms of what happens in eutrophication processes on the lake like this. The dynamics of this lake are influenced by many things, but what we need to do is come to grips with the issues. And unfortunately, in all the years I've attended both the Chautauqua Lake Management Group, the Alliance Group, there's very little input directed to it from the legislature. The legislature is represented by the county executive, which is all well and good, and we have a representation by Mr. Chagnon as the kind of the director president of the Alliance. They also have individual goals and needs. In other words, they represent stakeholders because they also support that process. So I think the Alliance itself has been one of the problems because of the consensus building that we don't have now. It needs to be re-examined. It needs to be looked at seriously. And I know that you're dealing with another sideshow, it's not a show, reality check, I guess, and getting a look at the lake and forming a lake district. That requires a lot of input, a lot of decision-making. It's also going to have cost factors. But the lake itself cannot survive by grants, program opportunity notices. It needs a dedicated funding source. Otherwise, we will never complete the goals and the objectives of this lake. And at best, we may not complete them anyway. So in regard to the resolutions that are there, you're going to have a different process to deal with at Vertis Bay than you would in the fall. You're going to have, rather than a surface problem, you're going to have a sediment problem. It's going to be an ice cap. It's going to move material around. The little fish are going to become reservoirs of phosphorus. They're going to be on the bottom. So you've got to decide that you're going to have a different application than you would have in the fall in weed removal and surface versus sediment cleanup, which also may have a problem in terms of the permitting process. So bear that in mind before you decide that you should do this now. In addition to that, you've also put aside some money in the bed tax to hire an outside consultant. I've hired a lot of consultants in my time in the energy business. For $10,000, you're going to get very little of anything in terms of a quality report that's necessary to evaluate a responsible relationship between all the stakeholders. It just isn't going to work out well. And then the end result is implementation of that. It's more about implementation and consultation. One other final thing, because my time is short, dealing with the landfill energy project, which is more of an interest to mine, is that I understand what you're going to do there, but you're also, when you do that, you understand that the methane gas is 20 times more, I guess, difficult to exercise from the environment than CO2. And that's a good thing, but are you going to flare more methane? You also are going to lose the possibility of thermal energy exchange by virtue of taking methane gas, compressing it, and putting it in a pipeline that'll be sold for renewable energy credits to a gas distribution company. And that's all well and good, but I do believe you have potentials that you haven't really looked at there in terms of using thermal energy as a viable source for attraction, for economic stimulation, and enterprise zone development in that area. So do what you want, but remember, once you've done it, you may have exhausted that possibility. And I don't know, maybe you have and maybe you haven't looked at thermal development up there on that particular property. I would encourage you still to understand how that works. So I covered 3 resolutions, and I hopefully 3 minutes. But again, we need to understand what you do when you apply your resources and you vote on things when you're not really totally assured of what the final results will be. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak to the first privilege of the floor?